To survive a YouTube channel, you gotta become the YouTube channel. That's why I got my name in the title. Hi guys, I've decided it's time for a Rambo ranking. Over the past few weeks, I have been slowly rewatching these films. I wouldn't say that this is one of my favourite franchises, but it's definitely a really sentimental one for me. Rambo and Terminator were pretty much the first two violent films I ever watched way back in the 80s. I would have been 5, 6 years old. My mum did let me watch some questionable films when I was a wee nipper. To be fair, she never let me watch out-and-out horror films, but she would let me watch some action films that were a little bit violent, a little bit bloody, but in the long run never did me any harm. Just recently, I watched Rambo Last Blood for the first time. It did take me a while to get onto that film, so my personal Rambo journey has finally come to an end this year, having begun way back in the middle of the 80s. But you know what? Enough waffle. I'm sure if you wanted waffle, you would have actually gone out and bought waffles and cooked them. So let's get into the main ranking, and we'll start with the film that I consider to be my least favourite in this series. I'm sad that this one has come last because I've got a long history with this film. I remember when it came out, I was 7, and on my way to school, I had to pass this bus stop, and for a while on the side of this bus stop, there was a massive poster of Rambo 3, and it just looked like the most exciting poster ever. The trouble is, there was no way that my mum was going to let me watch this one. I think this one was an 18, whereas the first two Rambo films, which I had been allowed to watch, were just 15s. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's right. Also, in the media at the time, there was a lot of criticism about the existence of Rambo 3. The press were just getting on the film's back, saying, oh, what do we need violent films like this for? And I think my mum would have picked up on some of that. So I knew that I was never going to be able to watch it, but I would walk past this poster every day for quite a while and just salivate at the mouth, just wanting to see it so badly. I think it was maybe 10 years later that I finally saw it. It came on TV and I was 17 or so at the time, and I thought, oh, I can actually watch this now. And I enjoyed it a lot on the first viewing. Bear in mind, this was still back in the late 90s. It still felt like the Rambo 3 action film type era back then, but watching it the other night for the purpose of this video, it feels really tame now in 2022. I mean, all the violence in this film, Rambo's shooting people and the villains are just going and dying with like hardly any blood. It's when you've watched Rambo 4 and 5 and you come back to this one, it feels a lot different. But even Rambo 2, which I would consider to be the brother of Rambo 3, the action's a lot better choreographed in that film. That there's just not an awful lot in the third film to get your teeth into that's really good. It's weird just how unviolent it is compared to the reputation it had back when it came out. It's a little bit like the Child's Play 3 thing. That was heavily billed as like the most offensively violent film ever when it came out. And I watched that a few years ago and I couldn't believe how tame it was. I dread to think what 80s and 90s media would have made of like Terrifier 2 or something. There is a lot of good stuff still to be enjoyed in Rambo 3. The character stuff is pretty decent. The stuff with Troutman, and there are some good Afghan characters. I even enjoy watching Rambo play goat football, but the villain is really bland, and you get to a point with the ending even when, you know, Rambo's about to take on the whole Russian army and it doesn't even feel that exciting compared to the finales from some of the other films. So I still think this movie's all right, but it was quite comfortably going to be in last place today. So next up we have the new one, Rambo Last Blood. I love the fact that the character is back in America for this one. So he's on his ranch in Arizona, or is it New Mexico? I'm not sure, it's one of those. But anyway, the fact that he's sort of come full circle from the first movie is really fitting. I feel like Troutman's speech about him coming full circle from Rambo 3 should have been in this film actually, although I'm not sure how they would have done that given that Troutman is presumably long dead. I love the finale in this. It's so brilliantly violent and delicious the way Rambo takes out how many guys? 30, 40 when they all turn up at the ranch. It's almost commando level. It's an absolute slaughter, and it's wonderful to watch. I can see myself in the future just pulling this scene up on YouTube and watching it in isolation from the rest of the film. It's that good. If I've got one complaint about this movie, it's the fact that Rambo gets captured halfway through. That kind of annoyed me at the time I was watching it, because when he goes to Mexico in this, I was thinking, oh, he's really going to bang some heads now. This is going to be great. And then he just kind of walks into a little trap and gets beaten up. And I don't know, I didn't like that. You know, it feels like the villains had to give him a chance in this film just so we could get the ending that we do. In Rambo 4, it's better because he never gets captured. You know, there's a certain aura about the character in the fourth film. In this one, it's kind of spoilt a little bit in the middle of the film, and then he gets it back at the end, and then we get that really sad sort of ending where Rambo contemplates his losses. But I think it's a good way for the franchise to have ended overall. Like I said earlier, I presume this is the last one, but I'm glad that it's not come last in the ranking. For some reason, it always makes me a little bit sad and depressed when the final film in a series comes last in a ranking. Coming into these rewatches, I thought this one was going to win. I've always remembered the second Rambo film as being my favourite, and I still really love it. It's not like it's gone down in my estimations. It just so happens that two of the other films have gone up in my estimations, but watching this in 2022, it still really stands up. It's a really satisfying action film, even today. It doesn't have the violence of parts 4 and 5, but the action is really well staged. There's a lot of creativity in it. You know, watching Rambo plow through the Vietnamese undergrowth, and he's fighting Russians and the Vietnamese, and he's firing arrows with explosive tips and setting cornfields on fire and jumping out of mud. There's just so much to enjoy. There's so many great ideas, but when I watched Rambo 3, I just didn't get that same sense of enjoyment. The action is much more generic in that film, but in this film, it's really, really cool and will probably always remain so. I like the Russian colonel in this. I can't remember the actor's name, but he's got tons of charisma. Even though he's only in probably 2 scenes in this film, he makes a real impact. He's much better than the Russian equivalent from Rambo 3, who is a little bit dull by comparison. I also like the girl in this. It's really sad when she dies. I kind of feel like I wish that she'd have survived in this film and gone on to have been a character who keeps coming back from time to time in the later movies. Maybe she could have even turned up in the final Rambo film as a sort of middle-aged woman, you know, tracked Rambo down after all these years. But that just goes to show how much of an impact she makes in what's barely probably 20, 30 minutes of screen time in this film. My only criticism about the second Rambo film is the bureaucratic CIA guy, who I just find to be really annoying. I think him and his buddies, the guy from Karate Kid and the guy with glasses, they're just really paper-thin characters. Compare these guys to the excellent cops from the first Rambo film, and it's no comparison really. But luckily we don't spend too much time with those guys and Troutman. Much of the focus of the film is on Rambo as he's trying to survive this hellish adventure that he's on. And yeah, I can't lavish this film with enough praise. Even though it's come third today, I still really love it. If I was going to do a review of it, I'd give it like 4.5 out of 5. It's awesome. This is the only Rambo film that I've seen at the cinema. I saw it with a couple of friends. I was in my late 20s at the time, and I'll always remember on the way back from the cinema, one of my friends said, "That had everything I would ever want to see in a Rambo film." And that comment just summed up all of our feelings for that day, I think. It was a comment that just cut straight through the crap and got right down to it. That's why I've always remembered it. But watching it the other night for the first time in 14 years, this film, it turned out to be way better than I even remembered. Like, I just remembered it as a fairly decent Rambo revival that just happened to also be very, very bloody. But this time around, I was thinking, wow, it's actually one of the best in the series. And for a time last week, I had it in my #1 spot. It was only yesterday, on further reflection, that I just decided to change my mind and nudge it down to number 2. But wow, what a great film. It's a really exciting adventure that Rambo goes on in this, going into Burma, a place which, as depicted in this film, just looks like an absolute hellhole. There's some nasty stuff that goes on in this, villagers and kids being killed, and I think a baby might even get killed at one point. But that just makes it all the more satisfying when Rambo turns up to tear shit up. And some of the scenes that he gets involved in this, the scene on the boat where he just takes a few guys out is really out of the blue and satisfying. And later on, there's this really good excursion into the Burmese army's camp, which is a much longer scene than I remember, but it's really exciting. All the stealth stuff that goes on, nobody gets captured, which I really like. There's a character who's sort of hanging back with a sniper rifle, taking guys out like he's playing Call of Duty or something, and it's just really, really exciting. Speaking of the other characters who help Rambo in this, I love the bold one who's got a bit of an attitude on him. I love the way that he calls Rambo Boatman. He's like, "Boatman, who are you really?" And I just love that character. And the ending to this, man, the final battle when Rambo gets on the little truck gun and turns it on all the soldiers, it's just absolutely brutal. It's annihilation on a mega scale. It's just fantastic. I remember in the cinema when the bit comes where the Burmese army send the reinforcements in on a truck and Rambo turns the gun on them and you see all these heads exploding in the truck from the bullets. I'm pretty sure in the cinema I went yes like that, and in a quite soft way, you know. I didn't like embarrass myself or anything, but I just vaguely cheering when that moment came along. There's some ropey CGI, especially the final kill of the movie where Rambo kills the leader of the army. I think there could have been a better confrontation. It's a little bit lame, that bit, but on the whole, man, what an action film. This is a really, really underrated action gem, I think, of recent times. And like I said a little bit earlier, almost my favourite in this franchise. But there is one film that has come ahead of it, possibly for sentimental reasons, maybe, but let's now get confirmation of what that film is. Yep, sorry to be a boring old fart, but I've got the original film at number 1, only by a horse's hair though. I mean, it might have been the sentimentality that just kept it ahead of Rambo 4. I mean, I've got such a history with this film. Some of my earliest memories in life are of watching this film, you know, and it really would have captured my imagination back when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, watching this guy fleeing through the trees, dodging bullets and hiding in caves. You know, when you're as young as I was and you're watching a film like this, it's a really exciting thing, and it never really, you never forget an experience like that. There's not much in the way of deaths in this. I think there's literally one guy who dies in the whole thing, but that's fine. It's such a great drama. The one death that we do get, though, is absolutely great. That complete tosspot falling out of a helicopter, it's fab. Great characters in this as well. I think the villain, played by Brian Dennehy, is still the best in the franchise. He feels like a real person, you know, and he's not completely a bad guy. It's very easy to picture this cop just going home and being an absolutely great dad, a great husband, maybe even a great cop as well, usually. You know, it just so happens that he's not got that much empathy for Vietnam vets, and probably he's also way too stubborn for his own good. It'd be fascinating to know what happens to this cop after this story. Does he recover from his wounds and then learn from this film and become a better cop, a better human being? I guess we'll never know, but I really like the character, you know. Watching his scenes all the way throughout this film, really enjoyable, and I never once hated the guy, honestly. Just a really great character, well played. Troutman in this film, easily the best of his 3 films. He comes out with some real zingers in this. My personal favourite is when he says, well, if you're going up there, you better take a lot of body bags. And he comes out with a couple of others as well. It's just a great film. I wouldn't count it as one of my favourite films ever. I mean, I'm going to be doing a top 100 favourite films of all time soon, and I'm pretty sure this film won't be in it. But it's a special film. It's a film that I've always remembered. It's a film I go way back with, and I think that's what's just about kept it ahead of certainly Rambo 4, which was really pushing it when it came to this rankings. So there we have it. I've got the original film at number 1, albeit not by very much. You know, there's not all that much between the enjoyment I get out of Rambo 1 and the other films in the franchise, not at all. But do let me know how you would rank these films. I'll be fascinated to know. And I guess we will leave it there for today. So I'll be back for another video very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.